Hello there, YouTube. This is going to be part two of, I'll probably have a better title when I upload it, but my rewards videos. The last one talked about experience points specifically, and how that translates as a reward for the character in terms of gaining experience and growing. Because as in GURPS, your experience is the same thing as character points. That is a one-to-one ratio of how your character grows and develops, rather than kind of I think a failing of the games based on a class system where you save up experience and then you just get bumped up a level every time you get enough. But it's also a reward for the player themselves for good role-playing, good participation, progressing the story. So in and of itself, experience should be, I think, your primary reward mechanism for your players and their characters. Another tool I use, the book and several of the game world books kind of talk about different ways to do this, but there are several advantages, and the same concept can be transferred to other game types that don't necessarily have advantages, but things like status and wealth, military rank, any of these things can be seen as a reward to players. If a player has a reputation as being very generous, every time they come into the village, they always donate to the temple for the needy and the poor, or something like that, and this becomes a very common theme with their character, you can give them a reputation as being charitable, as being a kind person. If they're a duelist sort of person, and they often get, maybe every gaming session or every town they go into or something like that, somebody calls them into the street and they fight a duel, and maybe initially they started with no reputation as being a duelist. Maybe it was at a low level, but this can increase as they kind of build that reputation for the character. And by, as a GM, encouraging the development of your player's character within their given character concept, this is also going to be a reward for them. This is another way you can keep them coming back to the table, keep them participating to the fullest, keep them telling that story, and just, it's something different than experience, even though in many ways it's similar to experience, but I think it's much classier than just straight up giving them a chest of gold, which I may do a video on material rewards, but I don't use material rewards that often as much of an incentive as I do in-game rewards. Because remember, all this stuff is just on a character sheet, or sometimes it's just in the player's head, and ultimately their level of enjoyment, well, for most players, their level of enjoyment is the memories they share, the stories they can sit around and tell with their friends who played at the game or other gamers, and be like, oh yeah, there's this one time we totally talked our way out of this one situation. I thought he was going to kill us, and now this happened so many times. I'm a smooth talker, but those first few times my character could just, every other time he opened his mouth, I was afraid of pissing off the guard or whatever. And you build up that reputation, you build up that confidence, you build up those skills by those rewards, by the rewards of experience, but also by the rewards of that reputation, of that status, of maybe, and if people are playing in a negative way, those things can be still progressing the story, can come back as disadvantages. Maybe that person is very feared. Maybe they're a cruel and merciless character and they're okay with playing a character like that, and they want doors to slam and windows to close when they come into town, so you give them negative status, negative reputation. But ultimately, you do it as a way to encourage good behaviors in the players and to progress that story and to keep them coming back, and so that way they have good stories to tell when they're not gaming. I've found that the fights and the battles, by the end of a campaign, they've all kind of mashed into each other, especially in the hack and slash sort of gaming styles where you could get into 5 or 6 encounters in one gaming session, and you don't really remember them. There are no epic moments. It's just hacking your way through a jungle, but the jungle, instead of made up of trees and vines and ferns and plants, is goblins and centaurs and all sorts of other crap. Um, but yeah, I guess I would call those social rewards, social benefits, if you will, to really elevate that character above the common man. Sure, they're in D&D, for example, again, because it's the most common system, there isn't that sort of mechanism to, at least in context of the game, there isn't a game mechanic that allows for status, really. And in the real world, not just now, but throughout history, and in most settings of science fiction, fantasy, Princess Leia is a princess. She is above the common moisture farmer that Luke Skywalker is, and the scoundrel that Han Solo is. He'd probably have a negative status, whereas Luke would just be a regular status, and Leia would have 5, 6 levels of status, possibly. And in fantasy settings, you just read Lord of the Rings, and you're talking about hell. One of the books is even called Return of the King. So nobility is a very, very common and easy to understand dynamic that games generally don't reflect. But when you give players that little bit, and if they start to enjoy that, they start to like that. Once they do become more than just common men or well-respected citizens, when NPCs refer to them as Lord or Your Majesty or something like that, it also begins to change their perception of the game, rather than just being all these experience points or just a high combat, high skill ability. They have more breadth and depth to them in terms of a dynamic character concept when you engage those different levels of social ability. And in my experience, most players actually enjoy that. They like the fact that as a knight they have status or reputation. They like the fact that as a gambler they have a reputation when they sit down at the table. They like the fact that maybe they're such a renowned blacksmith that their reputation precedes them when they come into a new kingdom looking for work. So if it's not something you use in your games, I highly suggest considering it. For those of you that play GURPS, you'll probably be kind of familiar with that idea. Maybe you don't use it as much because it's I've found it's really a unique. You can use it, of course, in other games, but GURPS is the only system that I've played where, as a matter of the rules, actually encourages the develop of advantages picked up in game. But I guess that's kind of all I gotta say about that. That pretty much covers everything. Thanks for watching, and yeah, thanks for watching.